Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Non-Profit Podcast. I'm Cherry Chen, and I am thrilled to have you join me on this journey. This podcast dives into the real world of nonprofit leadership, sharing inspiring stories, experiences, and the truth about what it takes to operate a nonprofit successfully. Think of this as your mastermind session on the go. Now, without further ado, please welcome today's nonprofit leader. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Nonprofit Podcast. Today, I have a special guest here, Cheryl Farrow from the Ontario Association of Certified Engineering Technicians and Technologists, short for OACETT, right? Okay, I'm pronouncing it right.
You are.
Yeah, welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
So when I was doing my homework, I noticed all these letters behind your name. And that you strike me as someone who is like an academic powerhouse. You got your MBA from, I believe, U of T.
Yep, from Rotman.
Yeah, like one of the most prestigious school, not just in Canada, also in the world to get your MBA. And then you also get your CAE, which is the Certified Association Executive designation. And that is crazy because I'm going through CAE. I tell the audience that I go through CAE and it's like a mini MBA course. I'll let you know, tell our audience why you're doing so much.
Well, and I did both. And the MBA in particular, which was Rotman's executive program, was actually a huge benefit to me. That was an investment that my first association made in me because I was identified as the succession plan to the current CEO.
Wow.
And he actually arranged for me to take the MBA. And it was an interesting comment because he said, in particular, if we're going to try to move you as a woman onto the board, you need some credentials behind you.
Oh.
So I took advantage of that, took the MBA. But the more I got involved in CSAE, the CAE was really specific to working in not-for-profits. And it was one of the challenges I actually had through the MBA because not all of the scenarios or the cases that we were working on really even had a parallel to the not-for-profit sector. So I found it a real advantage having both.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I found that through all my conversations with nonprofit leaders, I found that that those letters matter to maybe not necessarily to your peers or the people that work around you. It's more to the board of directors, like convincing someone else that you have that knowledge to lead the organization.
Absolutely. And certainly for my own career, because I've been the chief staff officer, I guess, for 5 different associations, but only one of them did I ever have any working experience in. So this is about trying to make the case when you're talking to selection, like the selection teams within not-for-profits, is that there is a different skill to being an association manager, which we have a credential for. And they may be better positioned to manage your association than simply having somebody who's in your profession. For example, I worked for the Canadian Bar Association. Just because you're a lawyer doesn't necessarily make you a good association manager. It's a different set of skills. And so having that credential is the way to demonstrate that when organizations are going through their search process.
Yeah, like I'm just so intrigued by the whole CAE designation and what it gets a lot of people. We had a lady yesterday that we spoke to, and she had a high school certificate. She started working really, really young, and she was being pushed to become a leader, but she would not get it until she got the CAE designation. They still are really paying close attention to these education and letters behind the name. Yeah. So, okay, our Unfiltered Nonprofit Podcast is about unfiltered comments and experiences. I love to ask usually I love to ask, what is your greatest setback?
And when in preparing for this, it threw me back because this did come from my first association, which was quite some time ago. And it was an association that supported the tourism industry. And it happened during the period of time when the SARS pandemic arrived. And our bank had made the decision basically that any organization involved in the tourism sector was a credit risk. We had a line of credit with them, and they called the line.
Oh no.
Came in with no notice, with no warning, came into a board of directors meeting and announced that the line was being called. And I was the 2IC in the organization at that time, and the CEO the following day had a stroke.
Oh no.
And I'm quite sure it was stress related, or you just don't know if it was coincidental. So I had the double whammy of this landed, and I now needed to do something about it. So I sat down with the board. I sat down with my senior staff. I reached back out to the bank and certainly told them, they could call the line today, in which case they would lose the loan, or we could work together to negotiate a repayment plan, because it was an organization with a lot of history. And we would have the position to generate the revenue, but we didn't have it tomorrow. So they did agree to negotiate a repayment plan. I focused all of our staff energies on revenue generation. And that involved, we sold training programs. And so we even offered to organizations kind of discounts if they would pay right away and get us involved. So various strategies just so that we could get kind of the cash flow in. It did involve having to make a couple of difficult staffing decisions, because we needed to increase revenue and reduce expenses at the same time if we were going to have the revenue available. But it was ultimately a strategy that allowed us to repay the loan and then continue the organization forward as a going concern. So it certainly opened my eyes to the to the kinds of challenges that you might face in a not-for-profit. But one of the biggest things as well was complete transparency. Like, we made sure the whole staff knew exactly what had happened and why we all needed to rally around this, and making sure the board was kept fully apprised all the way along, because we have to be concerned that the board might have faced personal liability on that, because it was a financial obligation. We obviously didn't want that to happen either.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to say the board of directors would be personally liable if the bank decide to absolutely call the loan and have no negotiation ground, right?
Yeah, that's right. They potentially could have.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the team rally around and then put out programs and sell training to generate revenue, and have creative payment plans so then you can get as much money as possible. Like, a lot of the time in today's market, what I found in the association world is that it takes time. I mean, to be fair, in our small business world, it also takes time to push out any type of program or training. So how did you, in what time frame did this happen?
It was over 6 months. So it was not a long time frame, but many of the deals, I would say, that we were able to close were already in progress. So as I say, it was a case of trying to negotiate with them. So they were warm leads, not cold leads. And it was a conversion process to try to get them converted as quickly as possible. And we simply needed to offer some incentives to get them to convert so that we would have the cash flow in.
Yeah, it must not be an easy time period.
It still was not an easy time period, no. And it did require a lot of commitment. So it wasn't just on my shoulders, it was on all of our staff, particularly those that had the role of in sales.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. That is definitely one of the greatest opportunity or setback. Yeah. So what is then your proudest moment? Other than overcoming that, repay your loan in 6 months, that was also a very big accomplishment.
There you go. Yes. Well, and I was going to say that setback, if you come out positively on the other side, can also be a good challenge.
Yeah.
But I think from my side, so I'm going to, from my very first association to my current association, in terms of sort of a proud moment. And this has been the implementation of a program. First of all, we implemented quite a significant governance transformation for the organization, which was a triumph in and of itself, a lot of modernization to bring best practices in governance into the organization. But one of the things that came up as we were discussing it was the concept of transparency. And the big piece about governance was we wanted it to be an open governance model. This isn't
Yep.
just, a closed group in the corner that's doing things and nobody really knows what's going on. So, but we recognize that particularly when you're dealing with members at large, it often tends to be just one-way communication.
Yep.
And so we said, okay, what can we do that could turn that aspect into a little bit more of a dialogue? And so we launched last year what we called our fireside chats with the president.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just an open webinar. Our president would start the webinar with, just a quick 5-10 minute update on what was new
Mm-hmm.
in OACETT, what was happening at the organization. But the rest of the 90-minute webinar was just open to members to ask whatever question they wanted to ask about what was happening within OACETT. It could be our certification program, it could be the process of certification, it could be our continuous professional development
Yep.
offerings, it could be what's happening in the profession, what are we doing with colleges, what's happening with our relationship with professional engineers,
Yep.
any gamut. And it has created a really positive buzz with members that we hadn't really anticipated. So when we first launched it last fall, we had just over 100 members that registered for
Mm.
the first one. We had our third one in February, and we had over 800 members
Wow.
that had registered. So it said to me the word had gotten out. You talk about the term unfiltered. This was unfiltered. Any
Yeah.
question, as long as it was broadly relevant. If
Yeah.
people were asking questions kind of specific to their situation and
Yeah.
certification or something along those lines, we ensured they got assistance and
Yeah.
they got follow up, but that wouldn't necessarily have been the basis of the questions we asked during the webinars. And all three that we have hosted, we actually had more questions than we had time for, and
Mm-hmm.
we hadn't even really anticipated that.
Yep.
You never really know. And we ensured that all of the questions were recorded and that we posted written answers to any questions that we weren't able to answer verbally during the webinar. And the recording of the webinar and then those written answers to the questions get posted on our website, so they're available to all members even if they couldn't attend during the webinar period. So that to me has been a really important step forward in transparency and dialogue with our members, and it seems to have been well received.
Hello, Unfiltered Non-Profit listeners. It's Cherry Chan here, your host and the CEO of OACETT Financial Solutions. Let's talk about something that can be a major headache for many nonprofits, managing your finances. Are you feeling overwhelmed by budgeting, financial reports, or keeping up with compliance? You're not alone. Many nonprofit leaders struggle with these issues too, but you don't have to. At OACETT Financial Solutions, we specialize in making financial management easy for nonprofit leaders and associations leaders. For over 18 years, we've been turning financial stress into peace of mind. Our services are designed to meet your unique needs, from day to day bookkeeping to strategic financial planning. Imagine having more time to focus on your mission, knowing that your finances are in experts' hands. If that sounds like something you need, I'm offering a no obligation 20-minute consultation. Let's discuss your challenges and explore how OACETT can help you achieve your goals. Visit nonprofitcfo.ca to book your call today. Let's simplify your financial management together. That sounded like a really successful project because I could imagine like going on a webinar. I regularly host webinar, and there are always people who would ask some relatively extreme questions, and it's often depending on how comfortable you are and how confident you are as well. Sometimes you can dodge some questions if you're not comfortable, but a lot of the time you have to answer those questions.
No, absolutely. And we felt the credibility and the transparency was that we would answer the difficult questions. And even if you didn't have an answer right away, good information from members, we'll follow it up. We'll try to report back on it on our next webinar. And I give a lot of credit to our volunteers as well, and particularly our president, because he's the one that fields the majority of the calls and he will, or the questions, and he will only pass it along to other members of the leadership team if he doesn't have the details himself. So.
Wow. Good for you, who has a really supportive president.
That's right. Very lucky for me.
Yeah. So like you do this and you describe this whole program coming with the from the lens of governance and transparency. The way that I look at it is really provide a channel for the members to provide feedback as well to the organization. Because, like you said earlier, I remember you mentioned that a lot of the time, association and their members, it's a one-way dialogue. It's
Yeah.
like you broadcast your message and whether they actually receive it or how they receive it or their response to it, nobody knows. It's like kind of, sending something into the universe in the dark. You don't know whether it's good or not.
Well, and we have specific examples of that during that webinar, because we would have people ask us questions about, why don't you offer X, Y, and Z? And we were already offering it, and we had
Oh,
sent, but it was communication that went out in a one-way push and had obviously been missed. And so at least then it's an opportunity to say, great, we've actually already done something about this, and it's available, and here's where you can find it.
wow. That is such a great platform. And I'm so glad that there's this type of engagement, because I see that it's not an easy thing. Because I host client only webinar among some of my clients as well. Um, I always get like good registration in my standard anyway. We got like maybe 100 people register, but the show rate at the actual conference, like the call at the actual call, is always like 25 people,
Oh yeah,
30
no,
people.
and we have attrition on this as well,
Yeah,
but even the registration numbers to me are an indication of interest.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll take that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. Now, you talk about that success, but you also talk a little bit about your financial challenge as well in the past, earlier on. And tell us a little bit about your financial challenge. It's a very interesting one.
And I'm suspecting possibly not unique, because this related again to our current organization, where, like many organizations in 2022, when the stock market took a dive,
Yep.
we've got investments in there, and so many organizations ended up with unrealized losses on their investment portfolio. But what it raised for me, and I'd been with the organization just about a year and a half, was a recognition that the organization had actually been budgeting for returns on investments, so unrealized gains, to actually balance the operational budget. So we're fortunate that we have, quite a far-seeing forecast window built into the organization. And so when this was flagged, we did have enough time to look at our expenses, look at some of our revenue opportunities, and line things up so that we could bring the operational budget pretty much into balance before the end of the year. So the only thing that we were having to report back to the board was the unrealized loss on the investments. But we were fortunate we had that lead time. If we hadn't had a robust forecasting system and had only found out with a month or two left that we had a big gap to close, we likely would have had a much more difficult story to have to tell to our board of directors. So it did completely change the way that we look at budgeting and ensuring that we're fully operationally balanced. But the other thing it really highlighted was that our organization is about 75% of our revenue comes from member dues. And so we needed to look at our dues, and our dues really hadn't been keeping pace. We did a market comparison with other similar organizations. We have comparable organizations across the country, and we were at a lower level than that. We had put dues increases on hold during the pandemic, so we really had some catch up to do. And again, so we did make the case to the board to approve a 30% increase in our dues, which is significant.
Yeah.
We put significant communication energies behind that so that members understood exactly what were sort of the new programs and services that had been brought in over time. And we needed the ability as an organization to afford that on an ongoing basis. And we budgeted firmly understanding that we would have some attrition as a result of making that dues decision. And we were very fortunate that we didn't have as much attrition as we budgeted for. So that put us in a better position at year end. And we actually received fewer complaints from members than we had anticipated. I had actually told my staff that I would be responsible for responding to any complaints that came in about increased dues. That wasn't a staff member's requirement. That was my requirement to speak with members or to respond to them by email. And we really didn't have as many as we anticipated. So to me, that says at least what we explained and communicated resonated with them. But it also resulted in us putting a policy in place so that we will be regularly looking at dues increases that are aligned with cost of living on an annual basis. And that allows you to incrementally increase dues where everybody understands that's the situation of the organization, as opposed to not keeping pace and then needing to bring these larger increases in, which are always more problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. So other than the 30% dues increase, which sounds crazy in 1 year, but I want to put it into perspective. How much dollar figure are we talking about?
And that's right. Our dues were less than $200
Yeah.
or just over $200 at the time that we brought it in. So in total it ended up being about a $68 increase.
Yeah.
So in real dollars, and actually we never did use the figure 30% with our members because that sounded extreme. We told them what the dollar value was, and we tried to equate it to things like, if you bought a cup of coffee at Tim's every once a week for a year, that would be the same as what you'd be paying for the dues increase. So like we tried to give them some comparables from that perspective.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what other things that you did to increase the revenue in such a short period of time before the end of the year, so then you can make up the unrealized capital loss?
No, exactly. Yeah. And for the most part, that was expense management, because unfortunately by that time of the year, when you work with deferred revenue from dues, even if you got a lot more members in, you're not recognizing a lot of that dues in the current fiscal year. It gets transitioned to the next fiscal year. So it really ended up being expense management. We had a couple of positions vacant that we left vacant until the following fiscal year, whereas we had plans to make hires during that period. We had a couple of projects which we deferred from Q4 until Q1 of the next year, because then it moved into a new fiscal year. So it was really around making those kinds of changes. Those were the only things that we could control in the time period that was available. Now, for the longer term, you and I were talking about the challenge that almost all associations face as well, which is the whole revenue diversification challenge, and are there opportunities for non-dues revenue? And our biggest focus there has been really changing our approach with our annual conference. And the annual conference in the past, I'm not even going to call it a conference. It was kind of bringing together our chapter leadership and our regional leadership and our board of directors, really in kind of a closed event that was around the annual general meeting as well. And so that was actually a cost center in the past, because those individuals didn't pay to attend. And while we would have some sponsorship around it, because it was also a fairly small audience, it was difficult to demand high sponsorship dollars. So we're in the process of transitioning that to be a true conference. And while we do still sponsor attendance for those regional representatives, we also make the whole event open to paying members who want to come for the continuous professional development. We combine it with our President's Awards dinner. We combine it with just some networking opportunities. And we're only in the second year of it, so we're still looking to grow it, but we've already seen more than doubling in the sponsorship revenue we've been able to make from it. We also are now receiving some ticket sales from the individuals who are coming. So we're getting it far closer to at least a cost neutral break even, and ideally we will turn it into a revenue source eventually. The other thing that we did was we completely separated it from our annual general meeting. And I think, like many associations, one big learning from the pandemic was that we had much greater success and participation in our AGM when it was fully virtual than when we were holding it in person, which was the pre-pandemic model. And once again, in this case, it goes to accessibility, because again, regular members at large, are not willing to drive around the province to attend, I hate to say it, to attend your boring business meeting, right? So we've made it fully virtual. We've implemented a very easy electronic proxy system. And again, we have far greater engagement with our AGM now. And we've also tacked on a little bit of that same fireside chat thing. So our AGM also includes at least a half an hour of open Q&A So one more opportunity for that.
Wow. Killing multiple things in one stone, right?
We have tried.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's efficient. I especially appreciate how little it's involved uh, in terms of hosting the fireside chat. I might have downplayed the effort into
Into being able
planning
to
it.
answer the
Yeah.
questions, but yes,
Yeah.
no, the event itself is fortunately relatively
Yeah.
easy. You know, you host a webinar and you set up registration. Like
Yeah.
it's not there's not a lot to it.
And you got your volunteer who's super good at answering questions.
That's right.
Yeah. You also talked a little bit about a startup organization that you were part of as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you were called into like a dying organization, essentially.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting one. That was it was actually a government funded
Mm,
um, initiative that was setting up a number of organizations to focus on labor market
mm,
issues. And this organization had received 3 years funding to
yep.
start up. They had engaged an executive director. The executive director had recruited a board,
Mm,
and he was then diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed
mm,
away sort of within 6 months.
yep.
So the the organization basically stalled
Yep.
because there wasn't staff in place and there wasn't anybody moving things forward, but they did have a significant commitment on deliverables to the government. So I was working in another organization that had also received some funding through this kind of umbrella labor market program, and was headhunted to say, you know, is there any chance you'd be interested in stepping
Mm,
into this role? And this was the first time that I would have been moving into an association where I didn't actually have work experience.
yep.
My first association was in tourism.
Yep.
I had worked in tourism. This was moving into the grocery retail
Yeah.
human resource sector. But I did understand how the program worked. I did understand how the deliverables worked. So even though I didn't know their industry,
Mm,
they did take a chance and they hired me, and I was able within the 1 year I had left
yeah.
to complete the 3 years worth of deliverables
Yep.
and also successfully apply for the next tranche of funding.
Yeah.
And during the next funding period, I was actually able to get the organization working on a project that was highlighted by the government as a best practice and
Wow.
deliverable out of their program. We were actually able to demonstrably demonstrate to employers just how much turnover was costing them if they weren't training and retaining their staff properly.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's the secret to success? How did you become the golden child per se?
So I think part of it was certainly the fact that I knew the program. So
Mm,
the ability to hit the ground running with, you know, knowing what the deliverables needed to look like, having some templates and models from the other organizations that I
mm,
had worked in. I think personally, I am very results oriented and outcome driven. So, you know, that helped me to design things relatively quickly to get us to the outcome position.
yep.
I did have a board of directors who were all in senior positions, and they were able to help move us ahead with some of the resources within their own organizations as well.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I think sometimes it really, you know, you have to spend a lot of work and you have to spend a lot of time, but it's worth it because the it's one of the things in not for profits, the organizations that you're working for, they're going to make a difference,
yep.
and so it's important to, you know, take the opportunity, however impossible it sometimes seems
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to get over those barriers, but there's usually lots of people willing to chip in and make sure it does because it's something they can be passionate about.
Yes, I like from all the conversations that I had. Feels like the there's always a purpose behind every organization, nonprofit organization, and that purpose really glue everything together. Essentially, no matter how messy the situation is, it almost feels like because there is that purpose, that overall goal. I think in business they call it like the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal,
That's right.
and that is the driver for everything that could come together.
No, absolutely. It's what your members rally around.
Yeah. So last question. Um, you are very happy. It's my first time meeting you. You have big smile on you. Tell me a little bit about what you do to maintain your mental health.
What I do to maintain my mental health.
Or if you don't have, you don't do a lot, and if it's just a glass of champagne, that's totally fine too.
I think to me, I mentioned I'm focused on outcomes. I'm a productive worker, but I think it's very much work-life balance. So I am not working 14-hour days. My
So,
time for myself is important time for myself, for my family,
mhm.
for the various activities I like to be involved in. One of the things I think that's particularly helpful for mental health, I like to sing. I'm involved in choirs,
Oh,
and that artistic outlet uses, I think, a whole different side of
the
your
brain.
brain
Yeah.
than work stresses can. So I think that's a good piece. But family as well, and doing lots of things with family and friends, and ensuring that remains an important focus in your life. I think those are my main strategies.
That's amazing. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for sharing all of your golden nugget and your wisdom with us. I'm sure that the audience of our podcast would learn many things from you, like creating the platform for communication. You call it transparency, I call it membership communication, governance, and then also budgeting. And I learned a few things here too. I never budget, I never put the return on investment as part of my budget, but at the same time, um, obviously you must have earned a lot in the past. That's why you could rely on it as well. And I see such a versatile, like a better term, experience or resume here, and really thankful that you're here with us today.
Well, thanks for reaching out and inviting me to. This was it was interesting to look back on some of these things over a career in a number of different organizations.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. All good. Yay. As we wrap up, I want to share a bit more about what we do at Otis Financial Solutions. For the past 18 years, Otis Financial Solutions has been dedicated to enhancing the financial management and strategic planning capabilities of hundreds of associations and nonprofits across Canada. Our extensive experience has enabled us to deliver tailored financial solutions that drive growth and enhance sustainability for nonprofits and associations. If you are interested in learning more about how Otis Financial Solutions can support your organization, I would love to offer you a no obligation 20-minute call. Let's discuss your unique challenges and explore how we would be able to help you achieve your goals.